On Christmas Eve, my passenger said he won't see the morning. Her dress was stained with blood. The windshield wipers fought against the December rain as I pulled up to the address on Maple Street. Christmas Eve, 11:47 p.m. Most drivers had called it quits hours ago, heading home to their families, their warm houses, their trees with presents underneath. But me? I needed every fare I could get. Rent was due in a week, and my ex-wife's lawyer had made it crystal clear that missing another alimony payment wasn't an option. The porch light flickered above the modest two-story house, casting nervous shadows across the wet pavement. I checked my phone again. Pickup for Sarah M. The app showed she was heading to St. Mary's Hospital, about 20 minutes away through the empty downtown streets. Hospital runs on Christmas Eve usually meant one of two things: someone was dying, or someone had just been born. Either way, it meant a passenger who probably wouldn't be making small talk. I was reaching for my coffee when the front door opened. She stepped onto the porch, and immediately, every instinct I'd developed in 3 years of night driving started screaming. The woman was maybe 35, blonde hair pulled back in what had probably been a neat ponytail hours earlier. Now strands hung loose around her face, damp with rain or sweat. I couldn't tell which from this distance. She wore a dark blue dress, the kind you'd wear to a nice dinner or a holiday party. But it was the way she moved that made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. She kept looking over her shoulder, back at the house, then up and down the street. Her movements were quick, jerky, like someone who'd had too much caffeine or too much fear. She jogged toward the car, her heels clicking against the wet asphalt. When she reached for the back door handle, the porch light caught the front of her dress. That's when I saw it. Dark stains splattered across the blue fabric, concentrated around the waist and chest area. In the dim light, they looked black, but I'd seen enough crime shows to know what dried blood looked like. My mouth went dry. "Are you Sarah?" I managed to ask as she slid into the back seat. Yes, that's me. St. Mary's Hospital, please, and we need to hurry." Her voice was high, tight, like a guitar string about to snap. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I put the car in drive. She was pressed against the far window, still looking back at the house. The street light illuminated her face, and what I saw there made my stomach clench. Her left cheek was swollen, a purple bruise beginning to form around her eye. Fresh cuts marked her knuckles. "Are you okay, Miss? Do you need me to call—" "Just drive," she cut me off, her voice sharp enough to slice glass. "Please, just drive." I pulled away from the curb, my mind racing. Every fiber of my being wanted to ask questions, to call the police, to do something other than pretend I hadn't noticed the blood on her dress or the fear in her eyes. But I'd learned the hard way that getting involved in passengers' business was a quick way to end up in situations I couldn't handle. Still, as we turned onto the main road, I found myself studying her in the mirror. She'd taken out her phone and was typing frantically, her injured hands shaking. The blue glow from the screen highlighted the tears streaming down her cheeks. "Traffic's light tonight," I offered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Should have you there in about 15 minutes." She nodded without looking up from her phone. "Good. That's good." We drove in silence for the next few blocks, the only sounds being the rhythmic whisper of the wipers and the distant hum of late-night radio from a car passing in the opposite direction. I kept stealing glances at her, trying to piece together what had happened. The blood, the bruises, the desperate need to get to the hospital, none of it painted a pretty picture. As we stopped at a red light near the old courthouse, she suddenly spoke again. "He won't see the morning." The words hit me like a physical blow. I nearly choked on my coffee. "What did you say?" She looked up from her phone, her eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. They were red-rimmed, hollow, but there was something else there too, something cold and determined. I said, "It's going to be a long night." She went back to typing. But I knew what I'd heard. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel now, my heart hammering against my ribs. The light turned green, but for a moment I just sat there, paralyzed by the implications of those 5 words. He won't see the morning. A car honked behind us, jolting me back to the present. I accelerated through the intersection, my mind spinning. Who wouldn't see the morning? Was she talking about someone at the hospital? Someone back at that house? Or someone else entirely? I found myself checking the rearview mirror more frequently, not just to look at her, but to scan the road behind us. Were we being followed? The Christmas Eve streets were nearly empty, just the occasional taxi or police cruiser making their rounds. But paranoia has a way of making every set of headlights seem threatening. "You said St. Mary's?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I needed to hear her voice again, to gauge her mental state. "Emergency entrance," she confirmed, still not looking up from her phone. Emergency entrance, of course. The pieces were falling into place, but they formed a picture I didn't want to see. Someone was hurt, maybe badly hurt, and this woman, covered in blood, bruised, terrified, was somehow involved. As we approached the highway on-ramp, she finally put her phone down and leaned forward. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Do you believe in justice?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. I could feel her eyes boring into the back of my head, waiting for an answer I wasn't sure how to give. I guess so. I mean, yeah, justice is important. Even when the law fails you? Even when the system lets you down over and over again? I swallowed hard. "I think most people try to do the right thing." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound, devoid of any humor. Most people. Right. What about the ones who don't? What about the ones who think they can do whatever they want because they have money, or power, or connections? We were on the highway now, the city lights blurring past us in streams of red and white. I could see the hospital complex ahead, its towers rising against the dark sky like a fortress of fluorescent light. "What happened to you tonight?" I asked quietly. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she sighed, the sound carrying years of exhaustion. "I made a choice," she said. "A choice I should have made a long time ago." My phone buzzed in the cup holder, a text message. I tried to ignore it, but it buzzed again and again. "You should check that," she said. "Might be important." Against my better judgment, I glanced down at the screen while we were stuck behind a slow-moving truck. The messages were from an unknown number. "Don't trust the woman in your back seat. She's dangerous." "Call the police now!" Ice water flooded my veins. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly swerved into the next lane. I looked up at the rearview mirror and found her watching me with those hollow, determined eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked, and I could swear I heard amusement in her voice. "Fine," I managed to croak. Just fine." But nothing was fine. Nothing was fine at all. The messages kept coming, one after another, each one making my blood run colder. "She killed him. Marcus Webb is dead. She's planning something at the hospital. Don't let her get there." I felt like I was drowning in my own car, the familiar smell of air freshener and old coffee suddenly nauseating. My vision blurred around the edges, and I realized I was hyperventilating. 3 years of driving nights, of picking up drunks and addicts and everyone else society forgot about, and I'd never felt this kind of terror. "Pull over." Her voice cut through my panic like a blade. I looked up to find her leaning forward, no longer pressed against the window. She was close enough that I could smell her perfume mixed with something metallic. Blood. "What?" I said, Pull over. There's a rest stop ahead. No, we need to get you to the hospital. I was trying to buy time, to think, to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do. The hospital can wait. Pull over. Now. There was steel in her voice now, and something else. Authority. My phone buzzed again when they're used to being obeyed without question. My phone buzzed again. His name was Marcus Webb. Check the news. Without thinking, I started to reach for the phone, but her hand shot forward, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. Don't. I could feel her fingernails digging into my skin. Up close, I could see that her knuckles weren't just cut, they were split open, raw, like she'd been hitting something hard. Repeatedly. Please, I whispered, just let me take you to the hospital. Whatever happened, whatever you're dealing with, there are people who can help. You don't understand. She released my wrist but didn't lean back. Marcus Webb was a judge, a respected member of the community, a pillar of society. She spoke his name like it tasted bitter. He was also a monster. I saw the rest stop ahead, a small cluster of buildings and gas pumps illuminated by harsh white lights. Part of me wanted to floor the accelerator, to race past it toward the safety of the hospital and whatever answers waited there. But another part, the part that had been listening to her voice, watching her movements, trying to understand the story behind the blood, that part made me slow down. What do you mean? I mean that for 15 years, Judge Marcus Webb used his position to prey on women. Young women, mostly. Women who appeared in his courtroom, who needed his mercy, his leniency. Women who had nowhere else to turn. I pulled into the rest stop, my hands moving automatically while my mind struggled to process what she was telling me. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a single semi-truck idling near the far end and an ancient Honda with a cracked windshield. He ruined lives, she continued, her voice growing stronger, more confident, destroyed families, and he did it all with a smile and a gavel and the protection of a system that never questioned men like him. I put the car in park but left the engine running. How do you know all this? Because I was one of them. The words hung between us like a confession in a church. I turned in my seat to face her fully for the first time since she'd gotten in the car. The fluorescent lights from the rest stop painted her face in harsh blacks and whites, making the bruises more pronounced, the cuts deeper. 15 years ago, I was 22, she said. Stupid kid from a broken home, caught with a bag of weed that wasn't even mine. My boyfriend at the time, real piece of work, convinced me to take the rap because I was young, female, no priors. Said I'd get probation, maybe community service. She laughed that bitter laugh again. Judge Webb had other ideas. My phone was buzzing again, but I ignored it. I was trapped now, caught in her story like a fly in amber. He called me into his chambers after the hearing, said he wanted to discuss my case privately. Said he saw potential in me, that he didn't want to see my life ruined over one mistake. She looked down at her hands. You can probably guess what happened next. I could. The pattern was depressingly familiar. Powerful man, vulnerable woman, a system designed to protect the predator and silence the victim. I tried to report it, she continued, went to 3 different lawyers, the district attorney's office, even the FBI. Know what they told me? That Judge Webb was a respected member of the community, that accusations like mine could ruin a good man's reputation, that maybe I'd misunderstood his intentions. That's awful. It gets better. 6 months later, my case came up for review. New evidence had mysteriously appeared, evidence that made it look like I was dealing, not just possession. Judge Webb sentenced me to 3 years, said it broke his heart, but that he had to think about public safety. The pieces were clicking into place now, forming a picture that was both clearer and more terrifying than anything I'd imagined. I served 18 months before my lawyer, a real lawyer this time, one who actually cared, got the conviction overturned. But the damage was done. My family wouldn't speak to me. I'd lost my job, my apartment, my future. I was 24 years old and my life was over. She pulled out a tissue and dabbed at her eyes, careful not to disturb the bruising. So I started over. New city, new name, new life. Went to night school, got my degree, built a career. And I spent every spare moment documenting what had done. Not just to me, but to others, because I wasn't the first, and I sure as hell wasn't the last. My phone had stopped buzzing, but I could see the notification count climbing on the screen. 17 new messages. How many others were there? 43 that I could confirm. Probably twice that many who were too scared or too broken to come forward. The number hit me like a physical blow. 43 women, 43 lives destroyed or derailed by one man's appetites and the system's willingness to look the other way. What happened tonight? She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the empty parking lot. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft I had to strain to hear it. I went to see him, at his house. I'd been watching, planning, waiting for the right moment. His wife and kids are visiting her mother for Christmas. He was alone. Sarah. I didn't go there to kill him. She turned to look at me, and I saw something like surprise in her eyes. I went there to confront him, to record him admitting what he'd done. I had evidence, documents, testimony from other victims. I thought maybe if I could get him on tape. She trailed off, shaking her head. But he laughed. He actually laughed when I played him the recordings of other women describing what had done to them. Said it was all fantasy, wishful thinking from women who couldn't handle the real world. My stomach turned. What did you do? I lost it. She held up her damaged hands. 15 years of rage just exploded. I started hitting him, screaming at him, demanding that he admit what he was. And he fought back. She touched her swollen cheek gingerly. He was stronger than I expected, knocked me down, started choking me. Said he was going to call the police, have me arrested for assault. Said I was just like all the other crazy bitches who couldn't accept that they'd brought their problems on themselves. The image was vivid and horrible. This broken woman finally confronting her tormentor after 15 years, only to be brutalized again. But then he made a mistake. He turned his back on me to reach for his phone. There was a poker by the fireplace. She didn't need to finish. I could see it all in my mind's eye, could understand the moment when survival instinct and 15 years of suppressed fury converged into a single violent act. Is he? I don't know. Her voice was barely a whisper. I hit him and he went down hard. There was blood, a lot of blood. I checked for a pulse, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't tell if he was breathing or not. That explained the blood on her dress, the desperate phone calls, the frantic typing. I panicked, called 911, told them I'd found him injured, that I was bringing him to the hospital. But then I realized how it would look. Me, covered in his blood, with a history of accusations against him. No one would believe it was self-defense. She looked at me with those hollow, determined eyes. So I hung up and called an Uber instead. The full weight of the situation crashed down on me. I wasn't just driving a passenger to the hospital. I was an accessory to whatever had happened in that house. My fingerprints were on the door handles. My GPS would show I'd picked her up at the scene. If Judge Webb was dead, if she'd killed him, I was already deeper in this than I could afford to be. Why the hospital? Because that's where they'll take him when someone eventually finds him. And because, she paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "Because I have friends there, people who understand what men like Webb do to women like us." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was part of something bigger, more organized. My phone buzzed once more, and this time she didn't stop me from looking. "Police are en route to 847 Maple Street. Judge Marcus Webb found dead. Suspect is Sarah Michelle Kane, age 37, armed and extremely dangerous." I looked up at her, my hands trembling. "Your name isn't Sarah." "No," she said calmly, "it's not." The world tilted sideways. Everything I thought I understood about this ride, about this woman, about my own situation, crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. I stared at the text message, reading it over and over, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. Sarah Michelle Kane, age 37, armed and extremely dangerous. "You're not Sarah," I said, my voice cracking like a teenager's. No, she was watching me with those hollow eyes, but now I could see something else there. Calculation. I'm Michelle. Sarah was my sister. The temperature in the car seemed to drop 20 degrees. Was? Judge Marcus Webb sentenced her to 5 years for armed robbery. She was 19, addicted to opioids after a car accident, desperate enough to hold up a pharmacy. Her lawyers said she could expect probation, maybe a year at most, given her age and circumstances. Her voice was steady now, clinical, like she was reading from a case file. But Webb had other plans. Called her into chambers, made his usual offer. Sarah was young, scared, naive. She thought if she went along with it, he'd be lenient, show mercy. I didn't want to hear the rest, but I couldn't stop her any more than I could stop a freight train. He gave her the maximum sentence anyway, said she was a menace to society, that her addiction didn't excuse her crimes. She died in prison 18 months later. Overdose, officially, but I know better. My hands were shaking so violently I had to grip the steering wheel to keep them steady. "Michelle, I think you should—" You know what the really sick part is? He sent flowers to her funeral. Big, expensive arrangement with a card expressing his deepest condolences to the family. Like he actually gave a damn about the girl whose life he destroyed. The fluorescent lights from the rest stop buzzed and flickered, casting shifting shadows across her face. She looked like something from a nightmare, beautiful and terrible and utterly unhinged. That was when I decided he had to pay. Not through the courts, not through the system that had protected him for so long. Real justice, the kind that can't be bought or buried or explained away. My phone was buzzing again, but I was afraid to look. Instead, I found myself staring at her hands, at the cuts and bruises that told the story of her final confrontation with Webb. "How long have you been planning this?" 15 years. Ever since Sarah died, I've been documenting everything. Every woman he hurt, every case he manipulated, every time the system looked the other way. I built a file that would make the FBI jealous. She reached into her purse, slowly, carefully, making sure I could see what she was doing. Instead of a weapon, she pulled out a thick manila envelope. Copies of court transcripts, medical records, sworn statements from 43 victims, photos, recordings, financial records showing payments made to silence potential witnesses. Everything. "Why didn't you just turn it all over to the authorities?" She looked at me like I was the most naive person on earth. "I tried that 15 years ago, remember? You think anything's changed? You think the system that protected him then would suddenly grow a conscience now?" She had a point, and we both knew it. How many Harvey Weinsteins and Jeffrey Epsteins had operated in plain sight for decades before their crimes finally caught up with them? How many victims had been dismissed, discredited, or destroyed for trying to speak truth to power? So you decided to take matters into your own hands? I decided to stop being a victim. My phone screen lit up with another message. Unit 47 responding to 847 Maple Street. Suspect vehicle, gray Toyota Camry, license plate. I didn't need to read the rest. I knew my license plate number. They know about the car, I said. I know. You used your real name to call the Uber? I know. They're going to arrest both of us. Maybe. Her calm was more terrifying than any hysterics would have been. She'd thought this through, planned for this moment, accepted the consequences before she ever raised that fireplace poker. Michelle, I have a daughter, a 15-year-old daughter who's already been through hell because of my divorce. I can't go to prison. I can't abandon her. For the first time since she'd gotten in my car, her expression softened slightly. What's her name? Emma. Does she know you love her? The question caught me off guard. Of course she does. Then she'll understand. Maybe not right away, but eventually. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for. That's not the point. The point, she interrupted, is that sometimes good people have to make hard choices. Sometimes the only way to protect the innocent is to sacrifice yourself. She was right, but that didn't make it easier to accept. I thought about Emma, probably asleep right now in her mother's house, dreaming of Christmas morning and the presents waiting under the tree. Would she understand when she woke up to news reports about her father being arrested as an accessory to murder? There's another way, I said suddenly. What do you mean? You said you have friends at the hospital, people who understand what Webb did. Yes. What if we never made it there? What if something happened to prevent that? She studied my face carefully. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe Sarah Michelle Kane got away. Maybe she managed to disappear before the police could catch up with her. Understanding flickered in her eyes. And the Uber driver? The Uber driver picked up a woman who said her name was Sarah M. She seemed upset, maybe in shock, but he had no reason to suspect she was dangerous. When the police stopped him, she was gone, probably ran into the woods while he was distracted. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something, a way for both of us to survive this nightmare, at least for a while longer. You'd do that? Risk obstruction charges? Aiding and abetting? Lady, I'm already risking those charges just by sitting here talking to you instead of calling 911. She smiled for the first time since getting in the car, a real smile, sad but genuine. You're a good man. Emma's lucky to have you as a father. I'm not good, I said. I'm just trying to survive. Same thing sometimes. She gathered up her purse and the manila envelope, preparing to leave. But then she paused, looking back at me. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you think he suffered at the end? It was a horrible question, but I could hear the need in her voice, the desperate hope that her tormentor had experienced even a fraction of the pain he'd inflicted on others. I think he understood, finally, what it felt like to be powerless. That seemed to satisfy her. She opened the door, letting in a rush of cold December air that carried the scent of rain and exhaust and something else. Freedom, maybe, or just the smell of a world without Marcus Webb in it. Michelle? She looked back at me. What are you going to do now? Disappear, at least for a while. I have friends in other countries. People who understand that sometimes justice has to be taken rather than given. And the evidence? The files? She held up the envelope. Anonymous delivery to the Washington Post, New York Times, and 60 Minutes. By tomorrow afternoon, the whole world will know what kind of man Marcus Webb really was. She stepped out of the car, then leaned down to the open window. Thank you for listening. For believing me, for giving me a chance. Thank you for not killing me, too." She laughed, the first genuinely happy sound I'd heard from her all night. "You were never in danger. I only hurt people who deserve it." And then she was gone, swallowed up by the darkness beyond the rest stop's harsh lights. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the rain on the roof and the distant hum of the idling semi, trying to process everything that had just happened. My phone buzzed. "Where are you? Police are asking about your location." I took a deep breath, put the car in drive, and pulled back onto the highway. I had a story to rehearse and a daughter to protect. But first, I had one more stop to make. 20 minutes later, I was pulling into the parking lot of St. Mary's Hospital. The emergency entrance was lit up like a Christmas tree, ambulances and police cars creating a chaos of red and blue lights against the wet pavement. I could see officers questioning staff, examining security footage, coordinating what looked like a manhunt. I parked near the far edge of the lot and called 911. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, this is Danny Martinez. I'm an Uber driver, and I think I just dropped off someone you might be looking for. A woman named Sarah M. She seemed really upset, maybe injured. Said she needed to get to St. Mary's Hospital. Sir, can you hold, please? The line went quiet for a moment. Then a different voice came on, older, more authoritative. Mr. Martinez, this is Detective Reynolds. I need you to stay exactly where you are. We're sending units to your location right now. Okay, sure. Is everything all right? The woman seemed scared, like maybe someone had hurt her. Just stay put, sir. We'll be right there. I hung up and waited, watching the organized chaos at the hospital entrance. Within minutes, 3 police cars were surrounding my Toyota, their lights painting the inside of my car in alternating colors. The questioning lasted 2 hours. They were thorough but not hostile. I was a witness, not a suspect, at least for now. I told them about picking up Sarah M. from Maple Street, about her injuries and obvious distress, about her urgent need to get to the hospital. I described her as blonde, maybe mid-30s, wearing a dark dress that looked stained. She seemed really shaken up, I told Detective Reynolds, a tired-looking man in his 50s with kind eyes and coffee breath. Kept looking over her shoulder like someone might be following her. When we got to the rest stop, she said she needed to make a phone call privately, walked off toward the woods and just never came back. Why didn't you wait for her? I did, for maybe 10 minutes, but then I figured she'd either called another ride or someone had picked her up. Happens sometimes. People change their minds, decide they don't need the ride after all. It was a thin story, but it held together well enough. The security cameras at the rest stop would show my car pulling in and leaving alone, but the angle wouldn't reveal whether my passenger had walked into the woods or simply ducked below the camera's line of sight. Did she say anything unusual during the ride? Anything that might indicate where she was going or what had happened to her? I pretended to think about it. She was on her phone a lot, typing. Seemed really anxious about getting to the hospital fast. Oh, and she asked me something weird. What's that? She asked if I believed in justice, like even when the law fails you. I thought maybe she was in some kind of legal trouble, or maybe someone had hurt her and the police couldn't do anything about it. Reynolds exchanged glances with his partner, a younger woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Did she mention anyone by name? Anyone she might have been afraid of? No, nothing like that. She just seemed broken, you know? Like someone who'd been fighting a battle for way too long. They asked me a few more questions about the pickup location, the exact time, whether I'd noticed any other vehicles in the area. Then they took my statement, copied my license and registration, and told me I was free to go, but might be called back if they needed more information. One more thing, Reynolds said as I was getting back into my car. If she contacts you again, if she calls for another ride or reaches out in any way, you call us immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. Of course, absolutely. I drove home through the empty Christmas morning streets, my hands still shaking slightly on the steering wheel. The radio was playing holiday classics, Silent Night, White Christmas, songs about peace and joy and goodwill toward men. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I got to my apartment, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. A quick Google search confirmed what I already knew. Judge Marcus Webb was dead, found in his home with massive head trauma. The police were looking for Sarah Michelle Cain in connection with his murder. But there was more, much more. By noon, the story had exploded across social media. Someone, an anonymous source, had sent detailed files to every major news outlet in the country. Files documenting decades of abuse, corruption, and cover-ups involving one of the state's most respected judges. The Washington Post's headline read, "Federal Judge's Hidden History of Sexual Abuse Revealed After Murder." The New York Times went with, "The Monster in Black Robes, How the System Failed Webb's Victims." CNN was running wall-to-wall coverage, interviewing legal experts about the broader implications of judicial misconduct. By evening, 43 women had come forward publicly, adding their voices to the chorus of accusations. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar. Young, vulnerable women who'd appeared in Webb's courtroom seeking justice, only to become victims of his predatory appetites. 3 sitting congressmen called for a federal investigation into the judicial system's handling of misconduct complaints. The state attorney general announced the formation of a special task force to review all of Webb's cases from the past 2 decades. Sarah Michelle Cain's sister, the real Sarah, was mentioned in several articles as one of Webb's earliest victims. There were photos of her from high school, a pretty girl with blonde hair and sad eyes who died in prison at 20 years old. I thought about Michelle, somewhere out there in the darkness, probably watching the same news coverage, finally seeing her sister's story told to the world, finally seeing the monster exposed for what he really was. My phone rang around 10 p.m. Emma. "Dad, I saw the news about that judge. Wasn't that in your area?" "Yeah, sweetheart. Pretty crazy stuff." "Did you know him?" "No, never met him, but it sounds like he wasn't a very good person. The news said someone killed him." That's terrible, right? Like, murder is always wrong? I thought about Michelle's hollow eyes, about 43 women whose lives had been derailed by one man's appetites, about a 20-year-old girl who died alone in prison because the system that was supposed to protect her had failed catastrophically. It's complicated, Em. Sometimes people do terrible things for reasons that seem right to them. I don't understand. I know. I hope you never have to. We talked for a few more minutes about Christmas plans and school and ordinary things that felt extraordinarily precious after the night I'd had. When she hung up, I poured another bourbon and sat back down at the laptop. The manhunt for Sarah Michelle Cain continued, but she'd vanished completely. No credit card transactions, no cell phone pings, no security camera footage. It was like she'd simply evaporated into the winter night. I hoped she'd made it somewhere safe, somewhere she could start over again with a new name and a new life. She'd spent 15 years seeking justice for her sister and 42 other women. She deserved a chance to find some peace. Around midnight, I got a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for the ride. Merry Christmas." I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it and turned off my phone. Some conversations, I'd learned, were better left unfinished. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, covering the city in a blanket of pristine white. By morning, everything would look clean and new, ready for a fresh start. Maybe that was enough. Maybe sometimes that was all the justice we could hope for. I finished my bourbon, locked the door, and went to bed. Tomorrow was Christmas, and I had a daughter to see. 6 months later, I was driving the Thursday night shift when I got a pickup request from the downtown Marriott. Corporate traveler, probably, heading to the airport for a red-eye flight. The name on the app was Jennifer Walsh. I pulled up to the hotel entrance and waited. The summer evening was warm, humid, filled with the sounds of downtown traffic and distant music from the rooftop bars. My life had settled into a routine again. Drive nights, see Emma on weekends, try not to think too much about Christmas Eve, and a woman named Michelle who'd vanished into the darkness. The Webb case had eventually gone cold. Without Michelle to testify, without physical evidence linking her to the scene, the investigation had stalled. The media had moved on to other scandals, other stories. But the damage to Webb's reputation was permanent. His cases were being reviewed, his victims compensated, his name removed from the courthouse where he'd once dispensed his twisted version of justice. A woman emerged from the hotel's revolving door, and I felt my heart skip a beat. Brunette now instead of blonde, shorter hair in a stylish bob, wearing a tailored business suit and carrying a leather briefcase. But the walk was the same. The way she held her shoulders, the careful scan of her surroundings before approaching the car. She slid into the back seat, and when our eyes met in the rearview mirror, I saw a flicker of recognition pass between us. "Airport?" I asked, though I already knew the destination from the app. "Delta Terminal, please, and there's no rush. My flight doesn't leave for 2 hours." Her voice was different, too, softer, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. She looked healthy, rested, like someone who'd been sleeping well for the first time in years. The hollow desperation was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. We drove in comfortable silence for the first few minutes, both of us pretending this was just another ride, just another night. But as we merged onto the highway, she finally spoke. "How's Emma?" The question hit me like a physical blow. She remembered. After all this time, after everything that had happened, she'd remembered my daughter's name. "She's good, really good, actually. Made honor roll this semester, joined the debate team. She's talking about maybe becoming a lawyer when she grows up." "Following in your footsteps?" "I'm not a lawyer." "No, but you believe in justice. She's lucky to have a father who understands the difference between what's legal and what's right." The words hung between us, carrying the weight of that Christmas Eve night when Ed made a choice that still kept me awake sometimes. I'd never regretted it, but I'd never stopped thinking about it either. "What about you? How are you doing?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching the city lights blur past her window. "Better, much better. I have a new job, new friends, a life that's actually mine, instead of one built around revenge and anger." "What kind of work?" "Victim advocacy. I help women navigate the legal system, connect them with resources, make sure their voices are heard. It's like what I was doing before, except now it's legal, and no one has to die." There was something almost like humor in her voice, and I found myself smiling, despite everything. "That sounds perfect for you." "It is. Turns out 15 years of documenting injustice makes you pretty good at fighting it through proper channels." We were approaching the airport now, the control tower and terminal lights visible against the dark sky. Our time was running out, and there were things I needed to know, questions that had haunted me for months. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? What happened that night?" She considered the question carefully, the same way she'd weighed her words 6 months ago in a rest stop parking lot. "I regret that it had to happen at all. I regret that the system failed so completely that violence became the only option. I regret that Sarah never got to see him answer for what he did to her." She paused, looking directly at me in the mirror. "But I don't regret stopping him. 43 women got justice because of that night. Hundreds more will never have to experience what we did because he's gone. So no, I don't regret it." I pulled up to the departure curb, putting the car in park. She gathered her briefcase and purse, preparing to leave, but she didn't move toward the door. "Danny?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. Not just for the ride that night, but for seeing me as a person instead of a monster. for understanding that sometimes good people have to do terrible things. You're not a monster, Michelle. You never were. Jennifer, she corrected gently. Michelle died that night too, in a way. Jennifer gets to live a life without looking over her shoulder, without carrying 15 years of rage around like a stone in her chest. She opened the door, then turned back one last time. If you ever find yourself in San Francisco, there's a little cafe called Hope's Kitchen in the Mission District. They serve the best coffee in the city, and they hire women who are trying to rebuild their lives after trauma. You should stop by sometime. Maybe I will. Give my best to Emma. Tell her to keep fighting the good fight. And then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd of travelers heading toward their futures. I sat there for a moment, watching her walk away, marveling at the transformation from the broken woman I'd picked up 6 months ago to the confident professional who'd just left my car. My phone buzzed with a new ride request, someone heading back into the city from the international terminal. I accepted the fare and drove toward the pickup location, but my mind was still processing everything that had just happened. Michelle, Jennifer now, had found a way to channel her pain into something positive, to turn her experience into a force for helping others. She'd escaped the cycle of violence and revenge that had consumed so much of her life. In a strange way, that Christmas Eve night had been her salvation as much as her damnation. As I waited at the pickup curb, I thought about justice and revenge, about the difference between them and the thin line that separated them. I thought about my daughter Emma, growing up in a world where predators still wore judicial robes and corporate suits, where women still had to fight tooth and nail for the most basic recognition of their humanity. Maybe Michelle was right. Maybe sometimes good people did have to do terrible things. Maybe the real tragedy wasn't that Marcus Webb had died, but that 43 women had suffered in silence for so long because no one else was willing to act. My passenger appeared, a businessman returning from a conference, tired and distracted, already on his phone planning tomorrow's meetings. As we drove back toward the city, I found myself hoping that Emma would never have to face the choices Michelle had faced, but if she did, I hoped she'd have the courage to fight for what was right, whatever the cost. The radio was playing soft jazz, the kind of music that made the city seem more romantic than it really was. Outside, San Francisco's lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere in the Mission District, a woman who'd once been consumed by rage was probably closing up a coffee shop, helping other broken women find their way toward healing. It wasn't the ending anyone would have written, but it was the one we got. Sometimes that had to be enough. The businessman got out at his hotel, leaving behind a generous tip and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes, watching the late-night city come alive around me. Cab drivers and food truck vendors, night shift workers heading home, young couples stumbling out of bars with their arms around each other. All of them with their own stories, their own struggles, their own moments when they'd have to choose between what was easy and what was right. I hoped most of them would never face the extremes that Michelle had faced, but I knew some would. The world was full of predators and victims, systems that failed, and people who fell through the cracks. But it was also full of people like Jennifer Walsh, who'd found a way to transform their trauma into something that could help others. People who understood that justice wasn't always about courts and laws and proper procedures. Sometimes it was about standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, whatever the cost. I turned on the app and waited for the next ride request. The night was young, and the city was full of stories waiting to be told. Some of them would be ordinary, rides to airports and bars and late dinners. Others might be extraordinary, life-changing, the kind of encounters that reminded you why you got into this business in the first place. Either way, I'd be ready, because that's what you did in this job. You picked up strangers and listened to their stories and helped them get where they needed to go, even if you couldn't always understand why they needed to be there. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was everything. My phone buzzed with a new request. The name on the screen was Maria S., and she needed a ride from a women's shelter to the courthouse downtown. Court appearance at 9 a.m., probably testifying against someone who'd hurt her. I accepted the ride and drove toward my next passenger, wondering what her story would be, what battles she was fighting, what kind of justice she was seeking. The cycle continued, endless and necessary, one ride at a time. The city lights blurred past my windshield like falling stars, and somewhere in the distance a siren wailed. Another emergency, another crisis, another story unfolding in the darkness. I drove toward it all with steady hands and an open heart, ready for whatever the night might bring. Because that's what you did. You showed up, you listened, and you helped people find their way home, whatever that meant to them. Sometimes home was a place, sometimes it was a person, sometimes it was just the knowledge that someone, somewhere, understood your story and didn't judge you for it. Tonight, like every night, I was just the driver. But sometimes being just the driver was the most important job in the world. I turned on the app and waited for the next ride request. The night was young, and the city was full of stories waiting to be told. Some of them would be ordinary, rides to airports and bars and late dinners. Others might be extraordinary, life-changing, the kind of encounters that reminded you why you got into this business in the first place. Either way, I'd be ready. Because that's what you did in this job. You picked up strangers and listened to their stories and helped them get where they needed to go, even if you couldn't always understand why they needed to be there. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was everything. My phone buzzed with a new request. The name on the screen was Maria S., and she needed a ride from a women's shelter to the courthouse downtown. Court appearance at 9 a.m., probably testifying against someone who'd hurt her. I accepted the ride and drove toward my next passenger, wondering what her story would be, what battles she was fighting, what kind of justice she was seeking. The cycle continued, endless and necessary, one ride at a time. The city lights blurred past my windshield like falling stars, and somewhere in the distance a siren wailed. Another emergency, another crisis, another story unfolding in the darkness. I drove toward it all with steady hands and an open heart, ready for whatever the night might bring. Because that's what you did. You showed up, you listened, and you helped people find their way home, whatever that meant to them. Sometimes home was a place, sometimes it was a person, sometimes it was just the knowledge that someone, somewhere, understood your story and didn't judge you for it. Tonight, like every night, I was just the driver, but sometimes being just the driver was the most important job in the world. I turned on the app and waited for the next ride request. The night was young, and the city was full of stories waiting to be told. Some of them would be ordinary, rides to airports and bars and late dinners. Others might be extraordinary, life-changing, the kind of encounters that reminded you why you got into this business in the first place. Either way, I'd be ready. Because that's what you did in this job. You picked up strangers and listened to their stories and helped them get where they needed to go, even if you couldn't always understand why they needed to be there. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was everything. My phone buzzed with a new request. The name on the screen was Maria S., and she needed a ride from a women's shelter to the courthouse downtown. Court appearance at 9 a.m., probably testifying against someone who'd hurt her. I accepted the ride and drove toward my next passenger, wondering what her story would be, what battles she was fighting, what kind of justice she was seeking. The cycle continued, endless and necessary, one ride at a time. The city lights blurred past my windshield like falling stars, and somewhere in the distance a siren wailed. Another emergency, another crisis, another story unfolding in the darkness. I drove toward it all with steady hands and an open heart, ready for whatever the night might bring. Because that's what you did. You showed up, you listened, and you helped people find their way home, whatever that meant to them. Sometimes home was a place, sometimes it was a person, sometimes it was just the knowledge that someone, somewhere, understood your story and didn't judge you for it. Tonight, like every night, I was just the driver. But sometimes being just the driver was the most important job in the world. I turned on the app and waited for the next ride request. The night was young, and the city was full of stories waiting to be told. Some of them would be ordinary, rides to airports and bars and late dinners. Others might be extraordinary, life-changing, the kind of encounters that reminded you why you got into this business in the first place. Either way, I'd be ready, because that's what you did in this job. You picked up strangers and listened to their stories and helped them get where they needed to go, even if you couldn't always understand why they needed to be there. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was everything. My phone buzzed with a new request. The name on the screen was Maria S., and she needed a ride from a women's shelter to the courthouse downtown. Court appearance at 9 a.m., probably testifying against someone who'd hurt her. I accepted the ride and drove toward my next passenger, wondering what her story would be, what battles she was fighting, what kind of justice she was seeking. The cycle continued, endless and necessary, one ride at a time. The city lights blurred past my windshield like falling stars, and somewhere in the distance a siren wailed. Another emergency, another crisis, another story unfolding in the darkness. I drove toward it all with steady hands and an open heart, ready for whatever the night might bring. Because that's what you did. You showed up, you listened, and you helped people find their way home, whatever that meant to them. Sometimes home was a place. Sometimes it was a person. Sometimes it was just the knowledge that someone, somewhere, understood your story and didn't judge you for it. Tonight, like every night, I was just the driver. But sometimes being just the driver was the most important job in the world. I turned on the app and waited for the next ride request. The night was young and the city was full of stories waiting to be told. Some of them would be ordinary, rides to airports and bars and late dinners. Others might be extraordinary, life-changing, the kind of encounters that reminded you why you got into this business in the first place. Either way, I'd be ready, because that's what you did in this job. You picked up strangers and listened to their stories and helped them get where they needed to go, even if you couldn't always understand why they needed to be there. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was everything. My phone buzzed with a new request. The name on the screen was Maria S., and she needed a ride from a women's shelter to the courthouse downtown. Court appearance at 9 a.m., probably testifying against someone who'd hurt her. I accepted the ride and drove toward my next passenger, wondering what her story would be, what battles she was fighting, what kind of justice she was seeking. The cycle continued, endless and necessary, one ride at a time. The city lights blurred past my windshield like falling stars, and somewhere in the distance a siren wailed. Another emergency, another crisis, another story unfolding in the darkness. I drove toward it all with steady hands and an open heart, ready for whatever the night might bring. Because that's what you did. You showed up, you listened, and you helped people find their way home, whatever that meant to them. Sometimes home was a place. Sometimes it was a person. Sometimes it was just the knowledge that someone, somewhere, understood your story and didn't judge you for it. Tonight, like every night, I was just the driver. But sometimes being just the driver was the most important job in the world.